Hello, Tech Pros, episode 157.
Even though you may sometimes feel like you're the only person who's going through these challenges, reach out and look for books and conferences and podcasts and a lot more resources out there. So, there's a lot of stuff that can give you a lot more sort of assurance and support around that.
Welcome to the podcast where I chat with professionals who are getting the job done using technology 7 days a week. Each week, we start with Motivation Monday. Tuesday is about productivity, Wednesday, leadership, Thursday, technology, Friday, people and communication, Saturday, entrepreneurship, and Sunday, being unplugged. All right, let's get started. Hello, Tech Pros. This is Chad Bostic, and I'm excited to introduce our featured guest today, Patrick Kwa. Happy Wednesday, Patrick.
Happy Wednesday, Chad.
You doing okay today?
I'm very well, thank you.
I'm actually struggling with allergies today. We talked about this before the call, but I want to tell the audience that if you hear me a little bit sneezing or coughing or my voice sounds just a little bit more scratchy than usual, man, I don't know what it is in the air. I'm blaming it on my wife's lovely perfume that she put on this morning. It smells wonderful, but it's not reacting too well with me. So
I can definitely empathize with you.
Yeah.
So.
We'll get through it, and this will be a great conversation. So Patrick Kwa is a technical principal consultant for ThoughtWorks in London. He's a conference speaker and author of the Retrospective Handbook and Talking with Tech Leads, and is passionate about bringing a balanced focus on people, organization, and technology.
Thank you.
Oh, goodness, man, got me all choked up here, Patrick. That was awesome. So I love both of these topics that you've written books on, man. So the Retrospective Handbook, I haven't read it yet, but it sounds, just the title of it makes me want to go pick it up, because once we started back when I was doing management and engineering roles and software development roles, man, once we started getting into just agile development and learning about retrospectives, I was like, you know what? This is a great concept, and it's not just applicable in agile development. It's also applicable everywhere, right? It's about taking a look back and seeing where we are and where we want to go, and what process improvements we can make along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's completely useful in every sort of context, and I'm really amazed at how many other sort of places and organizations are starting to adopt it, which is a really healthy sign. And I think it really takes quite a sort of good skill to actually get, really to get the most out of retrospectives. And I think this is one of the reasons I ended up writing that book, is that I've ended up sort of facilitating quite a lot. And I recognize a lot of people, when they sort of adopt the practice, a lot of the problems when people say, we're not getting anything out of this meeting time about looking back and whatever, has a lot to do with, how people plan or how they actually execute the retrospective. I think it makes a huge impact. And I think it's those little things that, I feel when you can actually get a lot out of those sort of rituals and practices, then people really appreciate the value behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all about, like you said, having the right process and practice in place. So maybe throughout this discussion today, you can fill us in on maybe the best practices and worst practices so that we can up our retrospectives to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So Patrick, as you know, today is Leadership Wednesday on Hello Tech Pros, and we're going to be talking about your other book, Talking with Tech Leads, in just a moment as well. But the first question I always start on all of these Leadership Wednesday episodes is the horrible boss story. Now, we're both laughing, and I bet a bunch of our audience members are chuckling to themselves, because we have all had horrible bosses. Now, Patrick, we don't want to name names, right? We don't want to throw people under the bus or do anything malicious. But I'd like for you to tell us that story about the behaviors and the principles and the attitudes that your most horrible boss showed, or that you've seen through your consulting and speaking and working. And then, what we'll do is kind of take some lessons learned from that and see what we can do to create a more effective leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess there's a couple of examples that jump to mind, and what I should actually sort of qualify is it's quite strange in that in the time that I've been consulting, I've never really had a sort of line manager or a boss as such. So I've been kind of bossless for quite some time, but I have seen a lot of people in leadership roles play out, I guess, maybe bad behaviors. And there's a couple of really strong examples that really jump to mind. I think there was one very early on in my career. where the sort of architect or tech lead for the team, who I would kind of consider a level of boss, was what I would call a very sort of controlling kind of figure. And it was kind of interesting on this sort of project because it was very early days sort of agile. So I would say that, it was well before Scrum took off and everyone wanted to be certified. And it was actually a lot of the days when people were sort of using XP. And XP was probably not a very well-used methodology around the world. And even dropping the term agile was kind of, sacrilegious in a lot of other organizations, but that's kind of how we ended up working. And the tech lead or architect on this team had a very interesting opinion about the way that sort of extreme programming or XP should be implemented. Such that, for instance, one of the practices in extreme programming is this pair programming where two developers are sitting next to each other. The architect didn't believe in any of that, but he did sort of understand some of the ideas. But he said, "Oh, it's a waste to actually have people, sitting at the same computer. But we'll assign pairs to sort of stories or features, and you can sort of talk about the sort of features, but you won't actually get to sort of work together." And that was, I wouldn't say that's a negative thing, but it was just kind of some of the examples of some of the sort of different behaviors. And this controlling sort of, I guess what I would describe as controlling in my perspective was kind of everywhere in the sort of project. And it kind of got to a point where, when you're sort of a new environment, you kind of take in the environment and you're trying to work out where you fit in. And then after a while, I guess you grow both in confidence and you sort of develop your skills. And that's where you might start to express your own opinions. And I remember one meeting, I think it was probably about maybe a year into working with this team. And it was really distinctive for me is that, we were having a sort of design discussion about where things should be. And then I was sort of voicing my general approach about how I felt that the problem should be solved. And the architect kind of stood up in front of the team and sort of started arguing and sort of shouting and saying, "You're undermining my authority. This isn't how it should be." And I was just completely shocked.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, I just didn't really know even how to respond. Right. And here I am in front of the whole team where we had a pretty good sort of team respect for each other, but being called out by the sort of my boss, I guess at that time, saying that I was undermining my authority sort of taught me a couple of different things about that sort of leadership role. I have to say that I felt really bad, and I'm not really one to sort of argue, particularly in a public space, around very personal issues. I feel that if people have particular issues that they feel should be maybe about inter sort of relationships that don't involve the team, I don't think it's appropriate to really talk about it in a public forum. So, I guess my natural reaction was to sort of, shut up and then wait for that meeting to be done and then to sort of draw them aside and actually talk to them in a bit more of a private space. And I'd also say that probably it's best to do it after, when everyone's sort of calmed down a little bit, because, I could definitely feel my blood starting to boil. I was really frustrated. Yeah. And, I'm pretty sure that trying to address it immediately after that meeting wouldn't have been, the architect wouldn't have been in any state at all to actually take in any sort of feedback. But for me, that was a really strong sort of memory from early on in my career about sort of interacting and dealing with people and sort of giving people feedback in these sort of public forums.
Wow, what a great, horrible story. I'm happy that you shared this horrible story with us, because I think we've all been there. And I don't mean it's great, meaning great for you, but it's a great example of a horrible boss. And there's a couple of things that I want to pull out of here. First of all, that this individual was an architect. Now, was the architect did they have HR responsibility over people, meaning to be able to hire and fire and performance reviews, or were they just a more senior technical person on the team?
They definitely would have had hire and fire responsibility.
Okay, but for you specifically?
I guess yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if he basically had said, to get me off the project, he probably would have done that if I'd really angered him, for instance.
Okay, right. So, but did like I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. Did you directly report to this individual like on an organizational hierarchy, or was he just so senior that he could have said, "Hey, I want Patrick gone," and then you would have been gone?
Yeah, I would have kind of reported to him in that structure,
Okay.
in that sort of situation. Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, because I've worked in some organizations where an architect or a technical team lead has that position, and I've worked in other organizations where they are more of just an advisor on the team that doesn't have that like HR responsibilities.
Right.
So I just wanted to kind of get a feel for that, right? So this was, even though they were technical and they were hands-on and they were a leader in this role, they were also a manager that had hiring and firing, right? So this is a person that could have like ended your career right there.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
for him to get very upset and really call you out in front of everybody.
Yeah.
How did that feel to you, of being right there in the middle of everybody else that was on the team, and your boss is telling you, "Hey, you're undermining my authority. This is my team. Like, basically sit down and shut up and do what I tell you to do." How'd that feel?
Yeah, I mean, I felt very small during that meeting, right? I think it's hard not to, because I think for me, my immediate reaction was like, what did I actually do that kind of caused and triggered that strong reaction? I think after the meeting, I felt, I guess honestly quite depressed, because it's kind of something that everyone, I believe, and this is maybe going back to retrospectives, where everyone's trying to do the best job that they can given what they believe in and what they know and their skills. And I kind of questioned myself, well, what did I actually do and why did he react like this way? And I guess I ended up talking to a couple of people, but I still felt very sad and not necessarily competent, I guess. And it can be a real big knock on the confidence.
So another question about the paired programming, right? So, it's if you haven't done it before, if you haven't done any kind of process change before, if you only know what works for you because that's what works for you, and you haven't tried a lot, change can be scary, right? And sometimes we don't trust other people's processes because, I don't know, it's different than ours. So did your team try to implement XP, or did this individual try to implement XP in another company or in another role, and the results were bad? Or was this just a preconceived notion that this individual had that, like, pair programming, extreme programming, sitting there with two developers on one keyboard is just a complete waste of time because it has to be a complete waste of time?
Yeah, I guess it was kind of interesting because I think this was maybe his second or third wave of doing XP, but I think for me, it was very much his version of it. So I think when we came to changing small things that didn't really threaten his maybe mental model of how XP should work and where it doesn't work, that was okay. But as soon as we started to propose, big changes, like maybe actually full-time pair programming, that would be a religious no-go zone. And yeah, he definitely had sort of opinions and had some experience, but he didn't really buy into the whole, maybe we should actually try something a little bit differently for, a full iteration and actually test out to see whether or not it'll work in this situation.
That's very interesting, because I had another guest on, a couple of months ago, Mr. Llewellyn Falco, and that was on a Productivity Tuesday episode, and he feels so strongly about the benefits of pair programming. He actually runs his own company and he hires developers. And he told me that if you're not pair programming with developers, you're completely wasting money on the project and in your business, because he sees so much benefit and so much productivity gains out of just having two people sit down together and one person drive the keyboard and the other person kind of drive the mind, and and just the kind of classic extreme program. I've never worked in that format, but after having that discussion with Llewellyn, I'm like, wow, that's very interesting. So if you want to check that out, Patrick, or if our audience wants to check that out, that's episode 86. So you can go to hellotechpros.com/86 and get access to that episode. But Patrick, we talked about the bad behaviors of this particular boss, and you kind of hinted about some of the things that you would do differently, right? So let's take those personal issues offline, right? Yeah. Let's have those discussions like separately, in the break room or in the in an office behind closed doors, where it's not right there just belittling someone or belittling someone's ideas right there in front of the whole group. So I think that's a great takeaway. And the other thing is just take a breath, right? Take a few moments, come back later and have that conversation when everybody's calmed down. Were you able to go back to that boss, go back to the architect later and have a discussion about what you were feeling and how it affected you?
Yeah, I was able to do that, but what I would say is that I ended up roping in another person to come in with me. So I guess I felt that there's that very junior senior kind of relationship, and I guess I was concerned that I didn't want to make the relationship any worse, and so my idea was to bring in sort of a sort of colleague who was not quite at the same level, but quite more experienced, who could kind of play a bit more of a mediator role. And who was maybe a bit more level-headed and provided a bit more of a neutral zone. And I felt that ended up working out quite well. I can see it backfiring to a certain sort of degree, depending on how neutral the other person is perceived. But in terms of actually sort of conflict resolution, I find it's actually a really useful technique.
Interesting. Great. I like that, finding someone who can be that mediator, to be that kind of diplomat, right? Who's saying, I don't have a stake either way, right? I care about the productivity of the team. I care about the health and well-being of the team. But whether we implement this or don't implement this, like, I don't have any stake in it. It doesn't matter. Yeah. But let's talk through it and talk through the pros and cons and get the data out and get the just the ideas out on the table without being like nasty to each other.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think one thing that I learned in that experience is that when you're in a conflict, I guess your sort of blood pressure goes up, your heart beats a bit faster, and you're not necessarily thinking about things so quickly. So in that sort of fast and slow thinking kind of book, it's the sort of the instinctive things coming up, and you're not really thinking through things very logically. And as a result, you might end up saying the wrong thing, which kind of then escalates the sort of conversation back into a very contentious kind of discussion. Whereas having a third party there actually helps to slow down that whole process. And I find that it's actually a useful thing to make sure that, you're both communicating well and, you're not letting emotions sort of take over and sort of drive that conversation.
And you got to have the right third party, right? You don't want to bring an instigator. I've fallen into the trap every now and then, a couple of times in my career, more than once, unfortunately, of having that third party in the room that's just kind of like a mosquito at a picnic, just kind of biting everybody and just getting them a little bit irritated, and then all of a sudden the fumes start coming out, and it gets even worse than it was before. So you got to pick that right mediator, the perfect person.
Yeah, definitely. You need somebody who has that sort of harmony gene, who wants to look at everything at making sure that things sort of get over, or people who are very restorative, trying to, I guess, bring back energy to sort of those negative situations, definitely.
Yeah. Hey, guys, can't we all just get along? We're all friends here. That calm voice.
Exactly.
That's great. So, Patrick, tell us about your book about talking with tech leads.
Sure.
What is that all about?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do internally to our company is build out, I guess, the next generation of sort of technical leads or architects. And one of the things I've noticed compared to other roles is that the jump from being sort of a developer to being an architect or a tech lead, so somebody who's leading a team of developers, is quite a huge jump. And if I compare it to, say, like a junior project manager to a bit more of a normal project manager or senior, those sorts of roles are kind of doing about the same types of tasks, but maybe the scope of that's a lot larger, right? So somebody might start off with a small project of 4 to 6 people, then a more senior project manager might go to a larger program or project. Whereas a developer to a tech lead role, it's a real big role shift where, as a dev, you're working with code, you're dealing with fellow developers and code reviews about how you solve problems, technical problems. And then suddenly as a tech lead, you're suddenly dealing with people, planning, whole system kind of architectures rather than sort of just code. And for a lot of people, it's a huge step. I cast my mind back to the first time that I was sort of thrown into the role, and I was like, am I really prepared for this? Do I have everything that I need? You have that whole imposter syndrome going. And the book was really to help bring out some of those stories about some of those same concerns, and also to explore, I guess, how people implement that role differently in different places. And I think that's a really fascinating part that I learned in the sort of interviews with different tech leads, is that everyone has their own sort of flavor of leadership style and focus, and they bring that into their role as being a tech lead. So it's a collection of different interviews, and yeah, it's really interesting to hear some of the same problems, some of the same challenges, and then the different techniques that people have of sort of approaching those problems.
Yeah, Patrick, when I was that senior developer and moving up into that lead position, what I had envisioned for that position and what it actually ended up being in my organization was not completely different, but it was very different from what was in my head. And so I pictured, more of that architect. Okay, we're going to set architectural direction. We're going to plan out the systems. We're going to come up with really, really, technical details across broader systems across the organization. And for me, for my role when I moved into tech lead, it was really about leadership. And so it was about going to meetings. It was about really coaching other developers, more junior developers on the team, figuring out what obstacles were in their path, getting them up, whether it's a technical, maybe they need some training or maybe they need some guidance in a technical area. But more than likely, it was more like productivity stuff, like how you can be more faster, or motivation stuff. Like, dude, you are awesome. You just need to be awesome. Or you need to like actually show up every now and then and come to work and do your stuff instead of flaking out, And
Absolutely.
Dealing with these people issues like you talked about is very, very completely different, coming from a very technical background to going into, okay, now dealing with people problems. So for me, I felt like I was struggling, really, really struggling with keeping up with my dev position and still writing the code and doing the technical stuff, as well as struggling with the leadership style and, finding my footing, finding my own personal leadership style there, and going to all the meetings and keeping up with what everybody was working on. I struggled for a long time with both of those. And at the end, I ended up having to choose between tech and choose between leadership. And I ended up going down the leadership path full time. So that was my story. Patrick, in just a moment, I want to ask you about your story about how you transitioned from a technical position into a tech lead position. And maybe we can talk about the pros and cons of both and what you felt throughout that experience. But first, we're going to take a quick break and thank our sponsors. This episode of Hello Tech Pros is sponsored by Hello Tech Pros. Want to be a guest on the show? Chad Bostic here, and I'm helping professionals who work with technology build a personal brand and get connected to an audience of thousands of technologists, entrepreneurs, business leaders, and investors. Download my cheat sheet of interview questions and apply to be a guest today by texting Hello Podcast to 44222 or visit hellotechpros.com/guest. Once again, text Hello Podcast with no space in the middle to 44222 or visit hellotechpros.com/guest. Are you new to podcasting? Are you looking for a fast, high-quality, yet budget-friendly podcast production team? Let TransSource Media take care of you. With a team of professional audio and video editors, writers, and graphic artists, they can help you build your podcast from planning, post-production, and platform submission. Using only cutting-edge software and studio equipment, they're here to make each and every show sound at its best. To get a free quote, please visit www.transsourcemedia.com or send them an email at marketing@transsourcemedia.com or call them at 209-505-5693. TransSource Media, transforming businesses through the power of multimedia. Okay, we're back with Patrick Kwa. Patrick is a technical principal consultant for ThoughtWorks in London. We've been talking about his two books, The Retrospective Handbook and Talking with Tech Leads. And I just shared my story, Patrick, of how I struggle with doing in the tech lead role when I first started in that role, struggling with both keeping up with my code as well as keeping up with the rest of the team and help grow and nurture their careers. So tell us about your first time as a tech lead. What was that experience like?
Yeah, I can still remember it quite vividly. Part of it's the whole traumatizing experience when you go
Right.
through it, and it's a growth phase, but you learn stuff out of it as well. And I remember it because I was actually in an airport coming back from a holiday somewhere, and I was before the holiday, I was actually working as a developer in one sort of project. And then at the airport, I got a call from staffing saying that actually instead of going back to this project as a dev, I'd be actually going back to this other project leading a development team. And at the first sort of moment, I was kind of like quite freaked out, going, "Why me? Like, why now?" And I think the same sort of issues, around the what should I be doing, like I was quite confident in myself as a dev and happy to do that sort of stuff. Is this even something that I actually wanted to do? And I think at that time I didn't really know who to really sort of think about as role models, or I didn't have any books or anything that I felt I could actually go reach out to understand what the role actually meant. And so I guess when I got back, it was kind of like tackling all the things that I felt were basically important and then just going for it.
Hmm.
And I was quite lucky because my dev team wasn't so big. So I think we had about so we did pair programming there as well. We had about, I think, 3 or 4 dev pairs. So that was about like 6 or 8 people. And then we had sort of a PM, project manager, sort of analyst, and sort of a QA person. So team of about 10-ish. And I guess I was just constantly stressed out. I can really remember this. I think a lot of it has to do with, trying to understand what are the things that are coming up, because you're trying to take this bigger picture of what else is supposed to be going on that, you can take care of. As well, at the same time, you still want to sort of keep your head in the code and understand what's going on. So you're sort of trying to move forward, but you're also trying to understand what's evolving in the code base and actually trying to contribute to that as well. One of the, I think, problems that I discovered is that I am really quite stressed out when I multitask between lots of small things and get constantly interrupted. So, as a developer, everyone loves their sort of flow. They get into that mode of like solving this problem and feeling like you're making progress. And, one of the things that I struggled with in that first time was really trying to do sort of time management. And I really wanted to be available to everyone, so that kind of meant that everyone could sort of keep asking me questions whenever they wanted, and that just led to a whole bunch of interruptions. And I think at some point I started to snap, and people noticed that. And the good thing about that project is that we encouraged like a whole bunch of sort of 360-degree feedback with everyone on the team. And so what was really nice about that was in this sort of leadership position where I also felt quite lonely, is that it was actually good to hear how other people perceived what I was actually doing and the impact that some of my behaviors that, when you're stressed out, you don't even realize you're doing, and what impact that was having on other people. And so that kind of gave me some feedback as to, the things that I could adjust. And, it was nice to actually be able to talk it over with people and then come up with different solutions and then try that out with that sort of team. So yeah, I mean, it was a really stressful role. And I look back at it and I kind of think, I was not really, I felt like I wasn't really ready for it. At the same time, I felt that actually everyone had a really good experience in the team. And that hopefully I didn't repeat some of the bad mistakes that I've seen from other sort of tech leads and architects in the past. Because that was kind of my guiding, I guess, light, but not really knowing how to focus on being what is a good tech lead.
Why do you think you felt lonely in that position?
Yeah, I think it's something about just feeling slightly out of the team. So I think there's different perspectives that you get in that role, and these are all trade-offs. And this is why I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing or a good thing. But as a tech lead, you're generally asked to think a lot further ahead of the team. So you're thinking about maybe the next release, or you're thinking about upcoming sort of features and trying to understand how that big impact on architecture is going, maybe impact on different stages of deployment depending on your sort of application. So if you're moving towards, say, production for the first time, there's a whole bunch of things that you have to worry about that, you're trying to keep the team focused on delivering features, but they don't really have to worry about that. And so you get a bit of a broader view, and I guess you tend to spend more time doing I guess things by yourself. So you'll be in meetings a lot by yourself with maybe other people from the business, but it's quite a different atmosphere when you're kind of surrounded by developers and you're all working on sort of the code. You're all sort of communicating via, the code base through commits and, talking through, different sort of meetings like stand-ups and stuff. But when you're a sort of tech lead, you kind of feel like you're suddenly doing things that nobody else is doing, and it kind of makes you feel lonely, or at least it made me feel lonely. But at the same time, it gives you a different perspective, and you end up with a broader impact. And I think that was a really nice thing, is that even though you could still write code as a sort of developer, actually you feel like you end up with a broader impact because you're helping everyone contribute to a bigger problem of sort of solving a solution rather than small bits of code.
Yeah, I love that. I felt in my leadership role, in my tech lead role, that, if I stopped worrying about the technical stuff in my example, and I identified several just kind of personality issues or conflicts within the team where there was just no communication between a couple of individuals.
Yep.
And I could get two individuals to start talking, and I don't just mean like say things, but to really start interacting with each other on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis or ad hoc as needed, and to help these two individuals who were just, they're great individuals, but they sat off by themselves, they had their headphones on, they did their stuff, and every now and then there would be an email exchange. And when there was a disagreement or misunderstanding, there would be these email like barrages back and forth, like pirates firing their cannons across each other's bow, but not really like having a discussion about what is this about. And so, no, he said this and this said this, and it goes all this long-winded examples on email. And when I'd just be able to, hey, let's get both of you folks together, a big old pot of coffee, and let's just hash it out. Are you mad at him? No. Are you mad at him? No. Okay, well, great. I think you each think that there's something going on deeper than it is. It's just you're both passionate about some particular technology or some particular process. Can we talk it out? Yeah, sure. And once those two individuals became, very cordial, very good relationship, just the overall productivity of like 5 or 6 people increased by, I don't know what the factor was, but increased great numbers, because then there wasn't this like potential animosity or just this ignoring each other state that was going on. So I completely empathize with you about the broader impact. Just helping people with their personal problems has a much broader impact on the team.
Yeah, and I love your example as well, because I think, as you said, even though, the conflict or the disagreement between two people is kind of the key sort of issue there, it's actually affecting everyone else in the team. And I think it's interesting because leaders and people have a choice here if they do or do not do something about that. And I think in that situation, particularly if it's affecting the atmosphere, as you said, about the rest of the team, that sort of mood to 5 or 6 other people, actually not doing anything can even have a worse effect because you're kind of multiplying that out. And I think that's one thing I really appreciate about the role, is that I think as developers sometimes, and developers love to complain about lots of different things. Sometimes there's a feeling of helplessness. And I think that's a really powerful thing about that role, is that there's an expectation that you should set the tone. You kind of set the culture of what you have through what you do and do not do. And I think intervening and trying to restore some of that sort of harmony, or to really, help get the team through different things, has a bigger impact. And I think that's a really, positive thing about the role.
What was the relationships with the other developers as you went from a contributor on the team to now the team lead, where you were friends before? Did those friendships and those relationships continue, or did some of the relationships start to change?
Yeah, I think in my first sort of tech leading role, I would probably say that the relationships were pretty strong, and we stayed pretty close because it was a lot smaller. I think I cast my mind when I was maybe a tech lead for a few teams later, where it was almost a team of about 15, 16 people, developers. And it's like on the cusp of like being really too big. And we were debating about splitting the team into sort of 2 sort of development groups. But it was at that point where it was like, it's manageable and doesn't really make sense architecturally to split the team. And I think there, it was a lot less about being friends. at a really deep level. I mean, we were really social with each other, but just in terms of the time that you get to spend with everyone, you don't really get to develop that same level of rapport that the other developers get to do when they're sort of pairing with each other constantly. And that's something that I think maybe contributes that feeling of loneliness as well, where, as a developer, if you're within them, you're sort of going to lunch with the people all the time, and you maybe focus your relationships on a couple of those key developers, you end up with really deep friendships with, a small set of the sort of group. But as a sort of lead, you kind of need to worry about everyone. You need to have some level of good relationship with everyone on the team. And there's that trade-off there with time and the ability of having that really deep sort of relationship.
And it's tough. It's tough to do, right? So instead of having the 2 or 3 best friends that you have on the team, to now have like an invested relationship with every single person on the team, regardless of what position they are, what their background is, right? What their personal belief systems are, or just like what they consider friends, right? You have to invest in those relationships to just make it more than cordial, more than just passing, oh yeah, hi, we work together. No, you really, really have to be very close to all these individuals, and that can take some time away from the other relationships that you used to have. If you come with 2 or 3 people on the team, you guys shared a lot of projects together, you've been deep in the code, like you fought fires together, you've been in the trenches for a long time with each other, and you just have a lot of personal history and a lot of personal respect. Now, as you're developing the relationships with the other individuals on the team, those relationships, they might suffer, they might be great, but chances are you will be spending less time with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also say that, one of the struggles is also you kind of have to spend time with people that really think differently from you and have different styles. I think when you're working as a team of devs, you naturally maybe move to people who work the same way as you, and you sort of feel that sort of cultural maybe alignment. And, it's easier then to develop really strong relationships with them. But as a lead, you kind of have to have relationships with everyone, good relationships with everyone, regardless of, how well you believe in the same sort of things, or the if you solve problems the same way.
Great stuff. Awesome point there, Patrick. I love that point. A lot of devs, just a lot of tech people in general tend to stick together, right? Birds of a feather stick together. And whether it's cultural beliefs or just coding beliefs, or like whether or not we put comments above the methods or below the methods, right? Those kind of individuals will naturally stick together over time. But as a lead, we're going to have to break down those barriers and just hang out with people that are different, that think differently.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Patrick, it's about time for us to wrap this up. But before we go, do you mind sharing any parting words of wisdom you have for our audience, the best way that we can connect with you? And then we'll say goodbye.
Sure. What I would say for anyone that is looking to sort of move on with their journey to being a tech lead is really, there's a lot more resources out there on the internet today. I think one of the really positive things is that there's a lot more people who have shared their stories about all the challenges of their maybe first time and beyond. And so I think that's really hopeful that actually even though you may sometimes feel like you're the only person who's going through these challenges, reach out and look for books and conferences and podcasts and a lot more resources out there. So I think if anything, there's a lot of stuff that can give you a lot more sort of assurance and support around that. If you'd like to know more, people can reach me on Twitter. So my handle is patqua, Kua. And my website is www.thequakua.com.
Patrick, thank you so much for joining me on Hello Tech Pros today. I really value your insight and your story, your first time story that you shared with us. It was a great example of how you can make it, right? I know there's a lot of people that suffer this imposter syndrome. I suffered it for many, many years before I overcame it and accepted it and moved into a tech lead position, but because I just felt that I wasn't ready. You felt that you weren't ready as well, but someone saw that in you and said, you're doing it, dude. You're doing it, whether you like it or not. And then you took it, you got through it, you worked through the issues, you learned a lot, and now you have a success story that you're able to share with me and with the rest of the tech pros out there.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation with you, Chad.
You bet. Tech pros, if you're in this position where you're a senior engineer, regardless of if you're in development or what you are, if you're in a senior position and looking to move into management, looking to move into leadership, a tech lead or an architect or a supervisor or manager position, think about this. The impact that you will have will be different, but it will be greater. The emotional commitment to the team will be much, much greater. So I think of it like as I matured from, a single guy to a person that dated, to a person that had a fiance, to a person that was married, to a person that had kids, each one of those stages in my life increased my emotional capacity, my capacity to love, my capacity to connect, my capacity to build relationships with people and empathize and understand what's going on with them and to try to help them. Your emotional growth will happen the same way if you allow it. So just watch out for that, look for that, aim for that. And like Patrick said, look for mentors around you, whether it's online, whether it's here on the podcast, or whether it's somebody there in your organization, and say, hey, I'm nervous, right? I have this imposter syndrome. I would like to grow into this area, but I'm a little bit scared about it. Can I talk to you about it? And I guarantee you there will be someone around there that have walked that path, that have been in your shoes, that was that very strong technical individual that somehow, some way along their career moved into management and is doing great. You've been listening to Patrick Kwa, and I'm Chad Bostic. And until next time, take care. The show notes page for this episode can be found at hellotechpros.com/157. Do you use Slack for team communication? Join the Hello Tech Pros Slack channel at hellotechpros.com/Slack. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, subscribe to this channel, and check back tomorrow. This has been Leadership Wednesday, but tomorrow, my featured guest and I talk about technology. On Friday, people and communication. Saturday, entrepreneurship. Sunday, being unplugged. And then next week, we kick it off with Motivation Monday, followed by Tuesday, productivity. And then we're back again on Wednesday to discuss leadership. And I'll talk to you tomorrow.